Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. Elliot Blackwell leaned against the cold metal railing of his ship, staring out at the swirling blackness of space. Stars dotted the distance like pinpricks, barely noticeable against the void. He tapped his fingers rhythmically against his time pod's control panel, waiting for the signal to come in. He hated these missions, the uncertainty, the creeping feeling that any wrong move could cause reality itself to splinter. "Elliot, you re-cleared for the jump," came a voice through his earpiece. It was Commander Pierce from the Time Guardians. "The anomaly in New York is worsening. Whatever's causing these time rips is spreading fast. You need to get in there and stabilize the situation before it's too late." "I'm on it," Elliot muttered, flicking a few switches. The pod hummed to life, a deep resonating sound that filled the small cabin. His grip tightened on the controls as the world outside the pod distorted, the stars bending and stretching into streaks of light as the pod entered the time stream. In seconds, the infinite black of space disappeared, replaced by a blue sky and a familiar skyline. New York City, 1939. Elliot landed the pod on the rooftop of an abandoned building, its surface covered in a thin layer of dust. The streets below were eerily quiet, though the city itself seemed unchanged at first glance. But Elliot knew better. Time wasn't just distorted here, it was unraveling. He made his way down to street level, his boots crunching against broken glass as he approached Times Square, and that sigh when he saw it. Julius Caesar was giving a speech in the middle of New York City. The Roman general stood on the edge of a platform, his toga billowing in the wind as he addressed an invisible crowd. Elliot blinked, stunned. Just behind Caesar, the unmistakable roar of World War II fighter planes screamed overhead. The clash of eras made Elliot's stomach churn. "You're seeing this too, right?" Elliot muttered into his communicator. "We've got visual confirmation," Commander Pierce replied, his voice tense. "This isn't just an anomaly. Something big is happening." "Elliot, get closer to the source." Elliot pulled his time stabilizer from his belt, a small palm-sized device capable of controlling minor disruptions in the timeline. As he stepped forward, a sharp sound pierced the air, followed by an explosion. Elliot ducked behind a car, his heart racing as pieces of debris rained down around him. The fighter planes were attacking someone, but who? A Roman legion stormed through the streets, swords clashing against modern steel as soldiers from entirely different epochs collided in battle. It was pure chaos. Elliot's stabilizer crackled in his hand, overloading from the sheer volume of time distortions around him. The sight was too much to process. Knights on horseback charging through 1930s New York alongside modern-day infantrymen. He had seen plenty of strange things during his years as a time guardian. But this was different. This wasn't just one timeline going haywire. Multiple time periods were colliding. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Before Elliot could act, a figure approached him. She moved with purpose through the chaos, her face set with determination. She was dressed in modern clothes, jeans, and a leather jacket, but her eyes held a knowledge far older. "Are you Elliot Blackwell?" she asked, her voice sharp and direct. "Who's asking?" he replied, cautiously reaching for his sidearm. "My name's Clara. I've been tracking these time distortions for weeks. You read some Guardians, right? We need to move quickly before things get worse." Elliot hesitated for a moment, sizing her up, but there was something about her, something that told him she was more than just a curious bystander. He nodded and followed her as they ducked through alleyways, trying to avoid the worst of the battles erupting around them. As they ran, Clara explained what she had discovered. These anomalies started showing up all over the world, but there's a pattern. They all lead back to an ancient civilization, the Chronos Syndicate. The Chronos Syndicate, Elliot. Faro, that is a myth. They were supposed to be some cult obsessed with controlling time, but they vanished centuries ago. "They didn't vanish," Clara said, her voice low. "They've been waiting. The time rifts, they were caused by someone trying to activate an ancient artifact called the Chrono Key. If they succeed, they could rewrite history, reset everything." "And where exactly is this Chrono Key?" Clara stopped and pointed to an image she had hastily sketched on a piece of paper. It was a map, and at the center was a location Elliot recognized immediately. Ancient Egypt. The reign of Pharaoh Ramses. Before Elliot could process her words, another explosion, ripped through the air. They were out of time, literally. Elliot grabbed Clara's arm. We need to leave now. Back at his time pod, Elliot punched in the coordinates for ancient Egypt. As the pod's engines roared to life, Clara looked at him. Are you sure this is going to work? I've never been sure of anything in this job, Elliot said with a wry smile, but it's not the best shot we got. The jump was smooth, but as soon as they arrived in Egypt, Elliot knew something was wrong. The landscape was distorted as if different parts of time were bleeding into each other. In the distance, Elliot could see the pyramids standing tall, but they were surrounded by futuristic structures, skyscrapers that didn't belong in this era. What the hell? Clara whispered. This is worse than I thought, Elliot muttered, stepping out of the pod. Time isn't just collapsing as sun merging. They made their way toward the epicenter of the rift, where Elliot's scanners indicated the chrono key was located. As they approached the site, they were met by a figure standing in the shadows, a man dressed in flowing robes, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The keeper, Clara whispered, he's one of the last members of the Chrono Syndicate. The keeper smiled, his voice smooth and deep. You've come to stop me, haven't you? Too late. The chrono key is already activated. Soon, time will be mine to control. Elliot stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. We can't let you do this. If you rewrite the timeline, you'll destroy everything. The keeper's smile widened. That's so the point. The current timeline is flawed. I will create a new one, a perfect one. Before Elliot could react, the keeper waved his hand, and the world around them shifted. One moment they were standing in the sands of ancient Egypt, the next they were in the middle of Victorian London. The streets were bustling with people from different eras, medieval knights walking alongside 19th century aristocrats, dinosaurs stomping through cobbled streets. Clara grabbed Elliot's arm. He saw her destabilizing everything. We need to find a way to shut down the chrono key. Elliot nodded, his mind racing. They needed to get back to the original time period where the key had been activated. But with time collapsing around them, that was easier said than done. In the chaos, Elliot noticed a faint glimmer of light in the distance, the chrono key. It was floating in mid-air, surrounded by a swirling vortex of energy. Elliot's heart raced as he spotted the faint glimmer of the chrono key, hovering in the distance like a star caught in a whirlwind of energy. It pulsed with unnatural light, warping the space around it, drawing in fragments of history and spitting them back out in random chaotic bursts. Every second, the key remained active. The timeline grew more unstable. We have to get to it, Elliot shouted over the deafening roar of the collapsing timeline. His feet struggled to find traction as the ground beneath him shifted from sand to cobblestone, then to cracked asphalt and back again. Clara was right behind him, her face set with determination as they pushed through the chaos, dodging soldiers from different eras who had no idea they were fighting battles in the wrong time. Ahead, the keeper stood still, watching them with an eerie calm, his eyes glowing brighter as he raised his hands toward the key. The energy around the artifact intensified, sending shockwaves through the air that rattled Elliot to his core. You can't stop it now, the keeper called out, his voice echoing as though it came from 100 different places at once. Time is no longer a line bound by rules, it's a force bending to my will. I will remake it, and you will watch as everything you know is erased. Elliot saw his fingers clenched around his time stabilizer, though he knew it wouldn't have. The small device was designed to fix minor distortions in time, not stop a full-scale unraveling like this. But there was no other option. If they didn't, shut the key down soon, there wouldn't be a timeline left to fix. Clara, sensing his hesitation, stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the device in his hand. It's not strong enough, is it? She asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. Elliot shook his head, swallowing hard. No, but maybe we don't need to fix everything. Just one thing, one key moment. If we can interrupt the keeper's connection to the chrono key, we might be able to pull the timeline back together long enough to shut it down. Clara nodded, her gaze shifting to the keeper, who was now walking slowly toward the key as though savoring every moment of the destruction he was causing. Trey, how do we interrupt him? Elliot looked down at his stabilizer, then back at Clara. Stay. We overload it. The energy from the key is feeding directly into the timeline as collapse. If we disrupt that energy, even for a second, it might be enough to sever his control. Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed the stabilizer from Elliot's hand and turned toward the swirling mass of energy surrounding the key. Then let's do it. Wait, Elliot reached out, but she was already moving, sprinting toward the heart of the vortex. His breath caught in his throat as the unstable ground shifted beneath her feet, but Clara didn't falter. She ran straight for the chrono key, the stabilizer clutched tightly in her hand. The Keeper's eyes widened in surprise as he noticed her approach. "Fool," he shouted, his voice thunderous. "You cannot stop me." Clara didn't respond. She skidded to a halt just beneath the key, the energy from the vortex pulling at her clothes, her hair, as if trying to drag her into the maelstrom. With a steady hand, she aimed the stabilizer directly at the key and pressed the activation button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crack, the stabilizer overloaded, sending a shockwave through the air that knocked Clara to the ground. The energy surrounding the key sputtered, flickering like a candle caught in the wind. The Keeper staggered backward, his connection to the key momentarily severed. Elliot didn't waste a second. He ran toward the key, his legs burning as the landscape around him shifted again, this time from the rolling sands of Egypt to the broken ruins of a futuristic city. He reached the key just as the Keeper recovered, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think this will stop me?" The Keeper snarled, stepping forward. "Yeah, I've waited centuries for this moment. Time is mine." Elliot grabbed the chrono key, the energy surging through his body like electricity. His vision blurred as the power of the artifact coursed through him, threatening to tear him apart, but he held on, gritting his teeth against the pain. The Keeper lunged at him, but Elliot was faster. With a final burst of strength, he twisted the key, redirecting its energy back into the timeline. The effect was instantaneous. The vortex around them imploded, collapsing in on itself with a roar that shook the very fabric of reality. The ground beneath their feet stabilized, the chaotic mashup of eras slowly fading as time began to reassert itself. The Keeper screamed, his form flickering in and out of existence as the timeline rebalanced. "No," he cried, his voice filled with rage and despair. Elliot didn't respond. He twisted the key one last time, and the Keeper's sand form disintegrated, scattering like dust into the wind. For a moment, everything was still. Elliot stood there, his hands still gripping the key, his heart pounding in his chest. The landscape around him had returned to normal ancient Egypt, calm and undisturbed by the chaos that had just unfolded. Clara groaned from where she lay a few feet away, her face pale but determined. Elliot hurried to her side, helping her to her feet. "Did we do it?" Elliot glanced around, the weight of the chrono key heavy in his hand. He said, though the exhaustion in his voice made it sound like a question more than an answer. Clara nodded, leaning heavily on his arm as they began the slow walk back to the time pod. "Good, I'd hate to think I overloaded your fancy gadget for nothing." Elliot laughed, though it came out as more of a cough. "Terror. Awful have to get a new one." They reached the pod and climbed inside, the familiar hum of the engine, a welcome sound after the chaos they just endured. Elliot set the chrono key down on the control panel, its once brilliant glow now dimmed, the danger it posed finally neutralized. "Where to?" Kara asked, sinking into one of the seats. Elliot didn't answer right away. He stared at the key, its dull surface reflecting the dim light of the pod. The Keeper had been wrong about a lot of things, but he wasn't entirely off base about one thing: time wasn't a straight line. It was fragile, vulnerable, and too many people wanted to manipulate it for their own gain. "Home," Elliot finally said, though the word felt strange on his tongue. "We need to get this thing back to the Time Guardians before anyone else tries to use it." Clara nodded, closing her eyes as the pod lifted off, disappearing into the folds of the time stream. The journey back was quiet. Elliot's thoughts raced, filled with images of the collapsing timeline, the Keeper's final moments, and the way history had nearly been rewritten. He had been a time traveler for years, but this mission had shaken him in a way none of the others had. Time was always on the edge of breaking, and it was only a matter of time before someone else tried to push it over. As the pod neared the headquarters of the Time Guardians, Elliot leaned back in his seat, his eyes drifting to the chrono key one last time. It had nearly destroyed everything, but it had also saved them in the end. Now it would be locked away, hidden from the world. But Elliot knew that as long as time existed, so too would the temptation to control it. When they landed, Commander Pierce was there to meet them, his face grim as he took the key from Elliot's on. "Good work," Pierce said, his tone terse. "Bro, we'll make sure this never happens again. Elliot nodded, though a part of him wasn't as assured. As they walked away from the pod, Clara fell into step beside him. So what now? Seer asked, glancing up at him. Elliot shrugged. Now we wait for the next catastrophe. Clara smirked, shaking her head. You're a real optimist, you know that. Elliot smiled faintly. They walked in silence for a while, the weight of the mission settling into their bones. The world was safe for now, but Elliot knew that time was a fickle thing. It had a way of slipping through your fingers no matter how tightly you held on. As the sun set on the horizon, Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Time, after all, had a way of catching up with you.